Welcome, everyone, and thank you for making time to join us today. The headline for this session, Cows Aren't the Problem, They're the Solution. I'm Jay Waldvogel, Senior Vice President for Strategy and Global Development for Dairy Farmers in America, and my responsibility for this session is to help provide context, to help talk about the role the global dairy sector plays in creating sustainable global food systems. Karen Scanlon is going to follow me, and she's going to talk about transforming the U.S. dairy sector to responsibly feed a growing population. And Karen's going to dive deeper into specific details and actions that the dairy industry is taking. So let's get started. Sustainability is a complex equation. It has a numerator that delivers positive benefits, and it has a denominator that has negative impacts. And it's a complex equation that we all agree must get solved and must get solved quickly. But in that need to find a solution, sometimes we can oversimplify. For example, we can simply say that sustainability is really all about the environment. The environment is about climate change. Climate change is driven by greenhouse gases, and greenhouse gases are the result of livestock, in particular dairy. To short-circuit it, you want to solve for the equation of sustainability, you need to solve for dairy. And oftentimes we get stuck in this kind of endless middle ground of not really pushing for a solution, but debating whether dairy is good or okay or bad or terrible. Maybe it's the opportunity to think about the extremes. What if we simply said if dairy is the problem, if dairy is the fault in the equation, why don't we simply take dairy out? Why don't we simply remove the cows? Let's think about what that would look like. What in fact would the world look like without cows? And I think for most people, they're probably unaware of the impact and the relevance the global dairy industry has. It starts with the fact that dairy generates more than $700 billion in value every single year. In fact, FAO lists it as the world's largest agricultural commodity. More than 6 billion consumers buy dairy every year, from the most basic glass of milk as a nutrition source to the most complex food products. And the global dairy industry is made up of more than 1 billion people. 1 billion people who go to bed at night knowing that the dairy industry is largely or entirely responsible for their livelihoods. An industry that creates 240 million jobs. Jobs creating feed supply farms, veterinarians, farm workers, truck drivers, factory operators, marketers, innovators. Those jobs are supporting more than 130 million farms around the world. Diverse dairy farms of every size and shape, farms on which 600 million people live, farms that average less than 3 cows. And nearly 40 million of those farms are actually women-owned, often in places where women don't have the opportunity to own land, maybe can't even own cattle, but can secure the milk and can be running businesses. And even more dramatic, if you look at dairy industry, look at cattle, 70% of the land they use is unfarmable for other reasons. Highly erodible soils, other reasons that you couldn't create an alternative crop. So only 30% of the land currently used for that would be available in a world without cows. Even further, 86% of the matter that cows consume is not edible by humans. Only 14% of what they consume, in theory, is competing. Cows simply use land otherwise is not farmable and consume food otherwise is not consumable by humans. A world without cows would be a dramatically different place. But let's stop and assume that that's possible. Let's take the view that you can, in fact, take cows off the planet. You can accept those losses and build a food system for the world that's based primarily on plant systems and maybe cellular systems, other systems in between, but those as the dominant ones. Could you model a solution that shows the math that works so you can feed the current population? Probably. But you'd be dealing with your own set of issues around the numerator and the denominator of the sustainability equation. Can you get a price point for cellular agriculture that will provide everyday low-cost nutrition for people in developing markets? Can you deal and solve for the waste issues that come with cellular agriculture? Can you manage through the risk factors that come with climate change on a plant-based model where you can lose an entire crop in one event? Can you manage through the fact you're going to require much more synthetic fertilizer when you don't have access to manure? You're going to have issues around soil health. There are their own set of problems that come when you take cows out of the system, and those things only become more stressed when you imagine trying to have a growing population. So let's take the reverse position then. Let's assume we found a way to take the cows off the planet. We found a way to feed ourselves to maintain the math around feeding a population of 7+ billion people. And now I reintroduce dairy. Dairy not as the singular solution, but dairy as part of a broader solution to how we sustainably feed the world, supporting the other food systems. What does dairy bring? What's the power and promise of dairy? It starts with nutrition, affordable nutrition, complete nutrition, not just for young people, but nutrition that's proven to reduce non-communicable diseases, to improve mobility, to improve productivity, nutrition that can reduce the cost of healthcare around the world by hundreds of billions of dollars a year. The cow is a recycler, taking again product otherwise not consumable and turning it into high-quality product, recycling waste product from other food systems. And an energy source, increasingly able to produce clean energy from manure systems that come from a dairy model. And manure that goes into creating soil health, not just to make the soil healthier, but to help it hold more carbon. Soil health that leads to biodiversity. Biodiversity supported by not monoculture you might get from cropping, but rather all those diverse dairy systems and dairy models around. And this inclusive, diverse economy is an economy that creates 240 million jobs because of the richness and value adding that goes in and around it. Economies that create regular cash flow, which are critical in many parts of the world. Having food systems that are based on reliance of 1 or 2 crops a year that are subject to climate issues, subject to pest, subject to trade issues, subject to other things where one bad event can wipe out a generation or a decade of a family's work. All of which leads us to a much more resilient food system. A food system that can manage through some of the shocks, something we've seen reinforced in the past year with the evidence of COVID. Where the power and the promise of the short supply chains for dairy, where it's close at hand and the high quality nutrition has meant all the difference in the world for many parts of the world. All of which comes together to create increased food security, stability, the opportunity for communities to develop. So, sustainability, it's a complex equation, and dairy has a role. Are you a believer? Having heard the promise of dairy, having heard the relevance and impact, is it enough to make you think that if you have to make a black or white choice for dairy, it is in fact part of the solution? Or do you still stumble with the challenge of the environment? What if I told you that in fact that environmental footprint, that denominator can be dramatically reduced? Not a hope that we can do it, but things we're actually doing. I'll pass it now over to Karen, who's going to talk to you about exactly what is happening in the U.S. dairy industry to reduce our environmental footprint. Karen?
Thank you, Jay. Great to be here. And I am Karen Scanlon, Senior Vice President for Environmental Stewardship at Dairy Management Incorporated and at the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. And Jay was really stretching our thinking about the role that dairy plays in our lives. And I'm going to stretch a little further, as he said, to get us thinking about U.S. dairy's role as an environmental solution. And it really all starts with legacy. Dairy farmers have long been stewards of their animals, their land, air, and water resources, and are passionate about continuously improving how they care for planet and people. U.S. dairy farmers have a legacy as environmental stewards, continually innovating to improve their footprint and by adopting eco-forward practices that enable them to produce more with less. In fact, the continued documented progress is that the environmental impact of producing a gallon of milk has shrunk significantly from 2007, requiring 30% less water, 21% less land, and a 19% smaller carbon footprint. And I'll share just a few examples of the imaginative thinking and purposeful innovation that has been a staple of dairy farmers for decades. So we'll start in Wisconsin with the Crave Brothers Farm. And they use a computer-controlled anaerobic digestion system to burn the gas produced by the manure of 2,100 cows on their farm. And that generates enough renewable energy to power both the Crave Brothers Farm and their Farmstead cheese factory. As well, they're generating energy to supply 300 nearby homes. And they produce really tasty cheese too. In Connecticut, dairy farmers Amanda and Matt Freund use their recipe for composted cow manure to create this stew that they then mold into a nutrient-rich, 100% biodegradable cow pot for planting seeds. And they use the cow pots on their farm to grow produce and flowers for their family's retail store, Freund's Farm Market and Bakery. And they sell the cow pots to home gardeners, commercial growers, and retailers across the country. And across the country in Washington, at Royal Dairy, Austin Allred uses hungry worms to break down the bacteria in the farm's wastewater. And then that is used to irrigate local corn and hay crops. The worms also produce a casting that serves as a high-quality compost for locally grown apples, hops, and various other commodities. And there are many examples that we could continue to tell you about where dairy farmers are committed to environmental sustainability. But we know that many people, as Jay pointed out, think agriculture is a big part of the problem. Most people are so disconnected from farming, and how food is produced, and they aren't hearing stories of farmer innovation and resilience and aren't seeing the broader positive impact of the industry. The reality is that despite accounting for less than 2% of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, U.S. dairy understands and is embracing its role in further reducing greenhouse gas emissions coming from the agri-food sector. In 2020, the U.S. industry for dairy set environmental stewardship goals, and these pledged to achieve carbon neutrality, optimize water use through recycling, and improved water quality through the management of manure and soil nutrients, all by 2050. These goals are collective, meaning that they are set at the field where dairy feed crops are grown, at the dairy farm, and at the manufacturing facility where dairy products are produced. Collectively, as an industry, we're on a path to reach these goals. The practices and technologies needed to reach the goals, they largely exist today, but they require further development and innovation. They require significant operational changes to implement and advanced technical assistance and the mechanisms to get them implemented throughout the very diverse industry. So how are these goals be achieved? To help meet the goals, the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy launched the Net Zero Initiative last year. The Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy is a forum that brings together farmers, dairy cooperatives, dairy processors, and other dairy organizations together as a leadership organization that's focused in a pre-competitive way on issues that affect the entire industry. And environmental stewardship is one of those. And through that focus, they've created a collaborative industry-wide program that aims to make sustainability more affordable and accessible to farmers across the nation's 34,000 dairy farms, and helping farms develop meaningful innovation, leverage new technologies, adopt economically viable, eco-friendly practices, and create new markets and products, transforming the industry so that producing environmental benefits is a smart decision for farms across the country. And we're focusing on 4 key areas shown on this slide, which represent the total footprint of a dairy farm. Starting on the left, feed production and practice change. It's about 26% of the footprint. And practices that you see listed here, including using renewable fertilizers made from dairy manure, can help to not only reduce the farm's footprint, but provide great benefits like improving soil quality, protecting water quality, and sequestering carbon. Circling down to manure handling and nutrient management. It's about a third of a farm's footprint. But practices and technologies here, such as dairy farmers can install something called a biodigester, and that generates energy from manure, which can then be used for electricity, heat, compressed natural gas, and even vehicle fuel. And if you remember the Crave brothers, they have a digester on their farm and are actually helping to deliver power and energy to 300 homes nearby. And then the top right, cow care and efficiency, another 30% of the footprint. But here there are practices focused on feeding and caring for the cow that can result in a reduction of the enteric emissions on a farm. So if we change the diet we feed our cows and reformulate it and use additives and certain ingredients, we can actually help to reduce those enteric emissions. The remaining part of the footprint is on-farm energy efficiency and renewable energy usage. And there are farms that are using and considering adding on to their operations renewable energy sources such as wind and solar to power their farms. There are three key strategies to advance across all these four areas. Advancing research, data, measurement, and models in each of these. Piloting integrated solutions on farms that create environmental and economic benefit. And partnering with supply chain companies to accelerate voluntary adoption of solutions across farms of all sizes and geographies. If we can make it feasible and profitable for all dairy farms to implement systems that use cow manure to nourish fields that grow crops and sequester carbon, produce renewable energy and biodegradable products, recycle wastewater, and adopt new innovations we have even yet to discover, U.S. dairy will do more to improve its environmental footprint, and it will become a fundamental driver to a sustainable, nutritious food system that can nourish people and planet. As you can imagine, this effort is time and labor intensive, comprehensive, and collaborative. Farmers have and continue to invest in their farms, and partners bring expertise, leadership, and financial support to strengthen the plan and accelerate action, leading to results. In the center, you see the organizations, dairy's national leadership organizations that are leading the Net Zero Initiative, including the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy, Dairy Management Incorporated, U.S. Dairy Export Council, National Milk Producers Federation, International Dairy Foods Association, and Nutrient. We also are working with research partners such as UC Davis and Cornell, and we've partnered with corporate organizations like Starbucks and Nestle, who are investing in and supporting and committed to supporting dairy as part of a sustainable food system. And NGO partners such as Soil Health Institute are part of building this pathway toward the environmental goals that dairy has set. Together, dairy and its partners were enabling progress across an important, large, and diverse industry, more than 34,000 farms and 15 million acres. And success means that the collective U.S. dairy industry advances to net zero carbon emissions and significant improvements in water use and quality. In addition to nutrient-dense foods and beverages, dairy farms are enabling other industries and communities to be more sustainable through innovation in bio-based products and extreme leadership in resource efficiency and regeneration. And success means that a system of continuous improvement is made to be self-sustaining through the realization of untapped value on farm to create new revenue sources for farmers from manure-based products, renewable energy, and ecosystem markets. This is a pioneering effort. And if we solve for dairy, the learnings from U.S. dairy's journey toward these goals can be transferred to other parts of agriculture, becoming a catalyst for broader change. And that catalytic change reverberates beyond our country's borders as well, sharing innovative solutions through the global dairy industry and leading to that new world that Jay was describing. Wouldn't you say so, Jay?
I would indeed. Thank you, Karen, for that insightful information on what the U.S. dairy industry is actually doing today to ensure that cows aren't seen as the problem, but in fact, we're part of the solution. And just to reiterate some of the things you heard from Karen, the U.S. industry is not just talking. The U.S. industry is acting, collaborating across the industry, and committing to hard targets to improve our environmental footprint. The focus isn't just on incremental improvement. It's a commitment to transformational change through disruptive improvement, relying on agriculture's century-long history of being innovative, of being a problem solver. And it's not just the U.S., it's global. The U.S. industry is heavily involved with Global Dairy Platform, a group of some of the world's largest dairy companies that currently is partnering with the FAO to drive an initiative called Net Zero Pathways to Low Carb Dairying, taking those learnings, as Karen talked about, and sharing them with the world, and building on other work done to show that the entire global dairy industry can help solve these problems. It's not directional and aspirational. We haven't sat here and simply said, we'll be somewhere in 2050 and we'll hope that some miracle science occurs between now and then. The dairy industry has been working together, measuring and reporting our progress along 11 different measures of dairy sustainability for years. Currently, 48% of the world's total formal dairy production reports through 11 different sustainability measures in the dairy sustainability framework, including greenhouse gases, soil, water, and waste, committing to improving and showing how we're improving. And it's not just developed markets, it's the entire dairy world. It's the developing markets, including initiatives like the Global Dairy Platform's Dairy Nourishes Africa, where we're looking to create a future-focused, sustainable dairy industry in East Africa. It's not the wealthier economies simply trying to solve their dairy problems. It's the entire dairy industry trying to solve the world's problems. And we're not just modeling how we feed the world, we're acting to nourish a global community. This isn't simply solving the equation of sustainability on math in order to save the planet. It's also solving it in terms of what it means to society in order to solve it for us. If you look at the world going forward, dairy is definitely part of the solution. And with that, I want to thank everybody. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your attention.